It's another episode of the Next Fix podcast where we love the comeback story, right? And as Jonathan and I just kind of touched on, a hero's journey doesn't really happen without the fall. And we're going to dig into that. We're going to dig into white collar crime. We're going to dig into recovery and then Altus Rehab and what it all means, what he's up to lately. But first, I want to know, how you doing today, brother? How you living today, Joe?
Today in full gratitude. It's a wonderful day. I get to already talk to Altus Rehab, some of the clients. They're ready to rock and roll on their weekend, and take their staff will take them on an outing. I'll be there for a therapy session later in the day, and I'm even getting rid of this fluffy hair today with some haircut. So
Hey,
self-care included.
right. Hey, man, you're tending to business, and I love that your business involves helping others, right? And so what a blessing to be able to do that. And so in typical fashion, though, we want to what we want to do first is we want to know when things weren't so great, when maybe haircuts and giving other people therapy wasn't on the to-do list. What did it look like when things were the darkest for you, brother?
Well, that was certainly during my 6-year addiction, right? But prior to the addiction, I had for 46 years of my now 56 years of life, I had unresolved trauma from my childhood. And, as the big book says, I was definitely putting up this facade to the outer world, particularly the entertainment space that I worked in as my, in my former career. And even in childhood, I just put up this facade that I was Superman, that I had high self-esteem, I was secure, but I was frankly the antithesis of all of those. I was insecure, had low self-esteem. My subconscious mind, like many of ours, is formed from birth to seven, and mine was programmed to live in survival mode, fight and flight survival mode. And so I use the childhood trauma as for discussion purposes because it contributed to, followed me to adolescence and adulthood, right? And that contributed to many poor choices that I made, my maladaptive behaviors, my addictions, but I don't use that as an excuse. I want to be very
Sure.
clear. I
Sure.
take full personal accountability for ultimately making those choices. I could have not made those choices and perhaps things would have been very different, but I chose to make those choices. And as a result, there were severe consequences.
So what were some of those choices? I guess how did it what if you could paint a picture of like how were you introduced into it? Was it just like did it start off innocent partying or was it how did that look like for you specifically?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there was innocent partying in college. Maybe once or twice a year I'd explore blow. Definitely, probably more than moderation, a lot of cannabis. It was like growing up for me, it was called grass. You know,
Right, right.
today it's in the dispensaries. I mean, cannabis can induce psychosis, and but yeah, it started out where, the addictive mind wasn't attached to anything at this, I would say in high school and college. In college, I mean, I rarely drank. If I drank, it would, and there were probably a couple times I did get drunk, but again, in moderation. I wasn't dependent on substances at this point or behavioral addiction of gambling. I wasn't dependent on gambling until my junior year of college. That was like the first big, like, crossroad where I should have been aware that perhaps I'm becoming a compulsive gambler. I had this genius idea, I call it genius within quotes, that, let me ask one of my fraternity brothers in college if he wants us, the both of us, to be like bookies to the Greek system in college, because bookies, as I often say, don't lose. They know how to, you know, weigh each side. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
so you had the idea that like, okay, I'm into this, meaning the gambling, but like how do you maintain being in it? Well, what people do to maintain that, like they become the house, right? Because you always win, right? That's the idea.
that certainly was the hope, but
Yeah.
definitely we did not successfully accomplish that goal. After 2 weeks, we lost a considerable amount of money. For us, for me, I was poor. I grew up poor. So I was using that as like this means to fit in with my fraternity brothers and others and socialize and go out with them to the bars in the evening, after school. So I was using that as sort of like the hope that I could afford to hang out with, my fraternity brothers and others. And the mindset of that thought, was obviously not correct. The mindset of a gambler, in fact, is one of grandiosity.
Yeah.
thinking, "Oh my god, I'm gonna win. We'll just win the first couple weeks, and I'll be able to really hang out with the guys and just, do what college kids do." So it didn't work out. As I said, we lost for us a lot of money, and that's when I left that school after my first semester junior year and transferred to another school in California. I grew up in New York, so this school was SUNY Albany, and I didn't gamble for a very long time, for many years.
So, but you like you mentioned like the door had been cracked open to like risk. Was that maybe like, like your new thing, maybe not new thing, but like that's what kind of hooked you as opposed to the grass and, the drinking?
Absolutely, that's definitely what hooked me. That was turned out to be my primary addiction.
Yeah.
Gambling later on in life. But yes, absolutely, I was not afraid to take risk. I would do anything. I was a people pleaser. I would do anything for people to like me in college, to like me even in high school, just to like me because I didn't even like myself because of the environment, the family dynamics in which I was raised. But again, ultimately, I made these choices. And so,
Yeah.
after coming to San Francisco to finish up my last year and a half of college, I graduated while in school for my second semester junior year and senior year. Took a job in the financial district of San Francisco while I was studying to be a CPA to, learn the analytics, learn how to be a CPA, not just prepare tax returns, but really to understand the numbers are black and white. They don't lie. And so I after 3.5 years of working in the financial district, my cousin called me up. He was in the entertainment space. He was a business manager, very well respected at that time. And it was always my plan to go work for him at some point. At this point in my life, I had my now ex-wife, my wife, and the first of my three beautiful sons. And when I called him to say, "Cuz, I'm ready," he said, "No, you're not ready. You're immature, you're irresponsible. What do you know about business management? Continue to work in the financial district and really hone your skills. And when I think you're ready, I'll give you a call." Well, fast forward those 3.5 years, but he called me toward the tail end of that and said, I'm ready, you're ready. Come down, pack up your little Honda Accord, and you and your wife and your oldest son come down. I'll put you up in an apartment and you'll start working with us as a CPA. So I love that opportunity. Drove down to LA, and first one in the office, as I often say, last one to leave.
Okay.
I did not want the word nepotism associated with me, and I was off to a promising career. 1999, his firm got acquired by, at that time, Chase Manhattan Bank, but now known as JP Morgan. And he asked me if I wanted to get into family wealth management, investment banking. I said, "Cuz, I love you. Thank you for the opportunities that you afforded me and the family, but I respectfully decline. I want to stay in the entertainment business management community. May I please take a small book of business with me to a new firm?" He blessed that. And in 2000, February of 2000, I joined what was once called GSO Business Management.
So during this time, are you flying straight? Like, I mean, like you kind of you're doing the right thing. And so maybe that the ugly addiction head hasn't really like crept in quite yet. And so you're just doing everything kind of right. You're making like, mature decisions and kind of you're still set up, but that evil side hasn't crept in to really to meddle things up, right? Is that
That's
what's going
correct.
on? Right.
Absolutely. So now, fast forward from the start of working for him until like 2016, 15, that that's the onset of the addiction mind. So I had a very good career as a partner eventually in that firm, wonderful clients uh, within the music, film, TV, and professional sports world. Never was enamored by that, who they were. To me, they're human beings like you and I are.
Well, that's a
And yeah,
blessing. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's a space where it's very phony. Everyone wants to schmooze, whether it's the agents, the lawyers, they all wanna get to know you so that you can their hope is you'll reciprocate. You'll give them clients and they'll reciprocate. Well, I would only refer a client if I thought the client was the right fit. So, growing up in New York, I'm pretty blunt and I wasn't gonna play the phony game. And for the most part, I didn't get caught up in that space. But of course, over almost 20 years in that industry, I'm sure there were times where I did get caught up, where I took
Yeah.
advantage of being able to have my assistant call to make me a reservation at a restaurant that's impossible to go. Aside from those little perks, if you will,
Yeah.
and probably developed a strong ego, just to be honest. That was one of my many character defects. Now I went from still insecure on putting up a facade, as I mentioned earlier, to continuing to put up a facade because at this point I hadn't dealt with my trauma.
Sure. And not only that, but it's kind of encouraged in the space that you're in, right? Like, and you're not the only one doing it. So now it's just putting fuel on the fire, right?
Yeah. And, yes, absolutely. And so as I proceeded in my career, ultimately in 2015, I was coaching my kids' youth sports teams, and this guy, my assistant coach, approached me and said, "Do you want to place a bet?" And I'm like, "Sure, I love participating in sports. I was a fairly decent athlete. I love watching sports. I got 3 sons at this point. They would love to go to games, and sure, I'll place a bet. Not even thinking it would be dangerous for me to do that."
Well, is he talking about placing a bet in professional sports or like on the kid's game? Like, is he like, hey,
No, no, not on the kids' games. And definitely not that.
okay, all right.
No, on sports. My gambling was every day for 6 years, calling my bookie, playing, NBA, college basketball, NFL, college football, baseball, whatever I could bet on.
Any action, Australian football, badminton, you're in. 'Cause I know that's why I asked about the youth sports because I know guys that are like, if they see, 2 cars on the street, which one's gonna get stopped at the red, they'll bet on anything. It's like, what can I put cash on? And so, yes, but this is you. You're calling the bookie every day. You're looking for action on any angle. You don't know a damn thing about half of the things you're betting on. Am I right?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, yeah, not at all. I mean, and I wouldn't just bet on one game. I'd bet on every game on the board. I was a complete degenerate at this point, but it started in that 2015 where I said, "Yes, let me place a bet."
Right.
Not even thinking it was a problem. It was just intended to be casual. After the first week, I lost, for me, money. In this point in my life, I was starting to make real money,
Sure.
and, but still, it was money. Instead of taking it from my own account, I decided with this second genius idea so far on this podcast, let me just quote unquote borrow it from client A, and I'll pay client A back next week. After the next
Woo!
week, I win. And that
Yeah.
next week turned into 6 months, years, and it was a downward spiral ever since I was started that compulsion and really immersed in a severe addiction that has the highest correlation of any addiction to suicidality.
Yeah, and well, I kinda wanna share something here. I lived in Vegas. I was in Las Vegas for 11 years, and while in Vegas was common because I also worked in a bar. So we would make, hundreds of dollars cash every night. And it was very normal that we would all go to the nearest bar slash casino and wind down. And it was also very common for us to put 20 bucks in the machine and then our drinks were free. Right. It was like we all did this. However, I remember seeing certain people very close to me, certain people that were very good friends. And when they put the $20 in the machine, it was something else that happened to them. And this is when I realized that gambling has a biological effect on the body. Their eyes would glaze over. And it looked like they just did a shot of heroin, right? It looked like they had just done a line of cocaine. Their bodies were reacting biologically to the money going into the machine, and I just noticed it was unreal to me that their bodies were reacting as if there was a substance because I was doing substances. I was familiar. I knew what that was like. But I couldn't believe it that these people were having a biological reaction to putting money into the machine. And I would have to basically rip them out, just to go home. I'd say, hey, listen, I'm not leaving you here. You're going to be, every dollar you made is going to be gone. I'm taking you home. And so it was so wild to me. And that's why you saying that it's such a severe addiction. Man, I seen it, brother. It is a wild, what happens is crazy to me.
It is, obviously I'm a different person today, but in that mindset I had, I'm chasing. I'm chasing for this, almost 6 year run, and I'm not sleeping at night. I can't look myself in the mirror because I'm not proud that I'm violating my fiduciary responsibility to a handful of clients who frankly didn't deserve that and were very close to me. And when I say that, people always say, what kind of moron would take from someone he respects? Well, I was that moron, but I'm not here to make excuses of how the mind works and all that. It's just, again, another choice that I chose to make.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I would literally call a bookie every day. The government seized my phone log and confirmed that. And they estimated the gross amount of my gambling and what it ultimately, the net was that I embezzled. And, it was just awful. I would go to Vegas maybe 3 to 4 times a year just in hope to change up my environment and hope I'll win that money back. And it was so great, right? You get this beautiful penthouse, you get food for free. It's not free. I'm paying for it with all my losses, right? I mean, the people, you think these hotels survive because people win?
Yeah, or they just give away. Oh, they're just so kind. They gave
Yeah,
me all this.
they love me. And so it took me a while to understand that. Uh, but of course, and honestly, I don't like to use absolutes like never. So rarely did I ever have a dopamine rush with gambling. Was actually quite fearful for me because I'm just doing it to inevitably in my grandiosity win everything back, give the clients back before my partners know. And this lie that I created for 6 years, my now again ex-wife, my partners, nobody knew what I was doing. And that made it even worse that I'm continuing, starting out in childhood, suppressing those childhood emotions. And now I'm continuing that pattern of suppressing the pain of violating and doing something that is completely unethical and not sharing with anybody because I don't have the courage to ask for help, which was my biggest problem.
Right. And what you just said, right? You didn't have the courage to ask for help. And that's it's so tough because the commonality is that we almost all have to be backed up against the ropes and hit rock bottom before we could do that. And it's like, and that's where it's make or break it kind of a decision time. And when did it come that, and forgive me, because I don't necessarily, I know that the white collar crime, you were found guilty, but did you do time? What did that look like?
Yeah, no, so in 2015, excuse me, in early 2016, I was with one of my clients, Beyonce, and we were in Tampa Bay. She was rehearsing for her Lemonade tour, and I got a call from my partners at that time saying, "Hey," and the only reason I'm going to mention this person's name is because this client went public. Any other clients, the other handful that I embezzle from, I don't disclose because I want to respect their wish to keep that sealed and private. But
Right.
Alanis, they called because Alanis Morissette, who was the largest victim of my white collar crime, basically I embezzled 4.6 million from her and my total embezzlement was 7 million when you factor in the other clients. And they called me, my partners, and said, so Alanis fired me back up in the fourth quarter 2015. Now we're in early first quarter 2016. I get this call from my partners when I was in Tampa, and they say Alanis has no idea where this 4.6 million came from. And so now, as in full addiction, I, of course, was dishonest to my partner on the phone and said, she's lying. And I concocted a story that just popped in my head. You know what? She invested in a cannabis business. I'll prove it. I'll fly back. I'll get her to sign a document. Like, here I am, like, continuing to be dishonest.
Ah,
I flew back. There was no shot of me getting her to sign a document. I knew that. And when I came back, I met with my partners and their lawyers now. And
wow.
I never played poker really in any sense, but I played poker with them, figuratively speaking, saying, hey, if you don't believe me, just give me a lie detector test.
Gosh.
So so now fast forward about 2 weeks since that meeting at my office, I'm now celebrating what I think is my 23 years of marriage in Santa Barbara, which is about an hour from where I live. And I get a call from one of my former partners. His name is Mike Wappenheim. He was my biggest mentor. He unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, and I never got to make amends to him.
Right.
He was the sweetest human being with a beautiful wife and daughter. And, frankly, I had great partners. None of them observed the unintended consequences of my poor choices. But he said, "Hey, we need you to come down to Beverly Hills to meet the retired FBI most experienced polygrapher." And I said, "Sure." And so that was the moment, to your question, where I then had to get off the phone and I had to tell my wife for the very first time what I've been doing over the last 6 years. And
Hold on a second, Jonathan. Let me just catch up because you're blowing my mind. This story, like really, like you stepped on the gas here. So Alanis Morissette, you basically have been gambling with her money unbeknownst to her. You make up a lie about her that you're gonna get her to sign some document that's never going to happen. So you're just digging this hole now, but at a much more rapid pace. And so it's just boiling. The water's coming to a boil. And then you say, it's your great idea. I'm gonna take a lie detector just to prove all of you wrong about me. But you know in the back of your mind, like this, so they call your bluff because you're playing,
yes.
poker with them. And so they call your bluff and they get this, lie detector test and a person to implement it. And so they're pushing. And now you realize, like, okay, the water's come to a full on boil. There's nowhere to go. I have to tell somebody. I'll start with my wife. And that's just kind of where we're at, right? Like, that's what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, and none of this would have happened at this point in my career. I should have just taken the money myself and paid it. But I didn't do that. I mean, that's where my mindset with that idea just was obviously horrific.
Yeah.
And had I, because at this point, as I said, I made that kind of money and I could have just taken it for myself, but I didn't want my wife to find out. I didn't want anybody to find out. And so I was making one poor choice after another,
Right. Yeah.
a series of poor choices. And so at this point, I drive down to, this was May 8th, 2016. I drive the hour and a half to meet with this polygrapher. I still have an ego. I'm still in
Wait,
deniability.
hold on one second though. You told your wife? Is that
Yeah, so when we hung up, thank you, I had to tell her the truth, and she was in shock, needless to say. And needless to say, that's why a couple of times I've referenced her now as my ex-wife, because I wasn't a great husband. It wasn't just the gambling, it was the infidelity and all these other poor behaviors. And she was a great woman. She is a great woman. And unfortunately, I didn't recognize that in my active addiction. And so, yeah, so I decided when I hung up the phone, I was in the bathroom snorting cocaine. And I said, let me just, before I leave tomorrow morning, let me Google how to beat a lie detector test. So here I am.
high on cocaine, figuring it out? Like, how this is how I'm gonna do it.
Of course, I'm Superman. Absolutely, right? This is the degenerate I was. And so the next morning, I packed up cocaine. I said, honey, I'll be back. I know you're scared. I know you're very angry. I respect that. But why don't you relax today at the hotel? Get spa treatment. We'll go out for dinner when I come back and we'll continue celebrating, right? And so on the way, snorting lines of cocaine for an hour and a half to a polygrapher, a polygraph test, placing my last bet on May 8th, 2016. And with my bookie, I get down there, walk in, he shakes my hand. I sit down, I put my feet up on his desk like I'm this big shot, and I start talking and I start establishing this rapport with him, as I often say, for approximately 2 hours. And I'm thinking in my head, wow, this guy likes me. I failed to neglect the part on Google where it says it's the polygrapher's responsibility to establish a rapport. So all the while I'm thinking I'm establishing this rapport, I'm going to pass this test, and he's the one doing that. Long story short, finally take the test, the polygraph. As I leave, I call my wife, I'll be there. We'll get back to the hotel. I try to log on to my computer at work and I'm not able to do that. So I call my assistant and ask her if she has access to her work emails. And she said, yes. I said, oh, this is that crossroad. I'm caught. And so it was that moment where I called my attorney and asked him, did you hear anything? He said, Jonathan, you failed that test worse than anybody in the decade's career of this polygrapher. I said, okay, I guess deniability doesn't happen from this point forward. And I said, what does this mean? He said, what does this mean? You face 23 years according to the sentencing guideline in federal prison. So that was my rock bottom moment. And the next morning, May 9th, 2016, which is my sober date, I met with him and he devised a strategy to hopefully work out a plea agreement with the government, which he was able to do, 4 to 6 year plea agreement. And on May 3rd, 2017, I was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. At that time, that was the lengthiest time within the plea agreement. I went in there thinking, hoping I'd get a year and a half. Uh, Government asked for 5, but the judge basically said, and I quote, "Given the audaciousness of your crime, I could deviate upwards beyond 6," before she went into her chambers. So I'm thinking now I'm getting 20 years. She came out back to the courtroom and she gave me that 6 years. And at that moment, I was in shock. That was my new reality. And she gave me 2 months till July 11th, 2017 to spend some time with my family, my younger son specifically, who was off to camp. On July 11th of 17, I surrendered to Sheridan Federal Prison in Oregon.
That's nuts, man. I know that clarity in, like, reality is tough for us. Like, I'm hearing you and, like, say a person's listening to this right now and they don't understand addiction, and they just might be thinking that you're just an idiot. You're
Absolutely.
not, and neither am I, but the addicted mind can blur reality and distort our decision-making process so bad that you will just do what makes 0 sense over and over and over again. And so, man, I can't that's just wild, right? And so you double down on this lie detector test, and you're like, I'm gonna knock this thing out of the park, and you couldn't have done any worse than anybody ever. And that's how blurred your vision was of what was actually happening. So I wanna know, like, in that short period of time they gave you with your family before you got locked up, how was how was your mental space during that time? Did you double down on the cocaine? You're like, "Well, this is my last shot," or were you, like, trying to embrace, the reality of things? I mean, what did that little bit of time look?
Well, I was already in sobriety now because May
Okay,
9th. So, and
sure, you said that. Sorry, forgive me, yes.
I was sentenced a year later. So I was working with a sponsor, finished the 12 steps was my goal before I went into prison. I went to an IOP program called Bet Teshuva, where they have their dual diagnosis, gambling and substance use. But I went there for the wrong reason still. I went there hoping, because they had an alternative sentencing department, that they would write a letter. I present it to the judge, and maybe the judge will use that to mitigate my sentence. I also, prior to that, which is important, sometime in 2015, someone sent me a New York Post article. There was a guy, I believe his name was Andrew Casperson, and he was alcoholic and a gambler, and he was going to be sentenced to 15 years in federal prison in New York. When he went to his sentencing, he brought Dr. Mark Potenza, a Yale professor and the world's leading expert in gambling addiction. Dr. Potenza spoke at his sentencing for 2 hours, and the judge, who was adamant to give him 15 years, reduced his sentence by over 70% to 4.5 years because of Dr. Potenza's reporting. I immediately called my attorney and said, let's hire this guy. And so I flew to New Haven, Connecticut, because he's a professor at Yale. And he did all the assessments on me and had never seen a compulsive gambler as severe as my mind was. And
Wow.
he wrote a great report, an honest report, and I flew him out for the sentencing, and the judge didn't ask him to speak. I was disappointed that that didn't happen, but I did ask my attorney, and he said, "Jonathan, she read the report," and famous word that I use all the time, many times a day, is be in acceptance, Jonathan, because this is a result of your poor choices, and
Sure.
now that's what I practice today, which we'll get to later, but it was the only pre-sentencing was tough because listen, I'm not going to be dishonest today. I practice rigorous honesty. I was crying a lot. I was scared. I don't know what prison's going to look like. My family is scared, and my younger son, I hired a prison consultant because I was afraid. The biggest question I asked him was, am I going to get raped in prison? And he assured me that not at a camp. You're not going to have that. And my son felt a little better. Not, he's still very worried. And I actually caused trauma for all three of my sons, you
Yeah.
know? The person they looked up to very much in me, I disappointed them. And not only did I disappoint my 3 beautiful boys, but my mother who was battling stage 4 lung cancer, my stepfather, my brother, people in the community that we live, the entertainment space, my partners who didn't deserve this, the employees who didn't deserve this, the people who I worked with didn't deserve this, even the indirect victims. By indirect victims, not the victims that I embezzled from, but I was their business manager and embarrassed them.
Yeah.
And so I own it today. I really hurt a lot of people by those choices that I made. I don't live in my past, but I don't
Sure.
forget my past.
Yeah. Wow. You are so dialed into making the most of it, man. And what a powerful story. And so, well, yeah, fast forward a little bit, like what does it look like now, or what was the result of all this? Because now I know you're steadfast, boots on the ground advocate for recovery and in so many different ways. So, what was this glorious result of it? How does things look like now?
Yeah, it started with when I returned to society, I thought I was well prepared to reintegrate. And so I couldn't get a job because I'm a felon. And so I took this job at Dunkin' Donuts for 2 months to continue to intensify my humility and continue to drop my ego. I got fired after 2 months because I wasn't cleaning the countertops and the floor well, and right? And as weird as that sounds, I didn't. And, when that happened, my higher power sent me a message, and he said, "Jonathan, it's time for you to work in the addiction and recovery community. I want you to go to addiction study school, get your KDAC. I want you to go to grad school and get your marriage family therapist license. And I want you to help your brothers and sisters not make the same mistakes that you made."
Yeah.
So I did that, and it was one of the many beautiful gifts that sobriety afforded me to work on myself, become educated in a field that I feel very passionate about. So fast forward, once I graduated, I did my internship, my practicum hours. I'm now a therapist and a program director at a 6-bed luxury detox and residential treatment center in Encino called Altus Rehab. I also do teletherapy with a nonprofit treatment center called the Chabad Treatment Center. I sponsor lots of people in gambling. I'm very active in Gamblers Anonymous here in Los Angeles. I take pride in my recovery, very, very much pride. My whole life today is dedicated to helping those not make the same mistakes that I made and to help them go from what I was living in my pseudo self to living in my authentic self today. And just, I want them to leave treatment saying that they came in here with adverse childhood experiences, unresolved trauma, and they're leaving here with the majority of that trauma resolved. I
Yeah.
want them to leave treatment and say what I can say so proudly today, that I am proud of who I've become and who I'm becoming.
Yeah.
And today I make very little money, but I can honestly say that I am the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. I think I'm a role model for people in the addiction community. And I say that with humility because therapists should not self-disclose unless they think it can benefit their client. And so for me, I can establish in session 1 for most times, not all times, a therapeutic rapport and a therapeutic alliance by just being transparent and authentic with them and letting them know that my mind operates the same way you're entering here. It used to operate that way. And if I could rewire my subconscious mind, if I can change my behaviors and patterns of yesterday, so can you.
Yeah.
All I ask is if you are committed to maintain a sustainable recovery, I promise you I'll give it my all. But I cannot work harder than you. So if you're willing to roll up your sleeves, which you already are,
You're
what
right.
they did that I didn't do was they had the courage to ask for help and seek treatment. I did not have the courage to ask for help because I felt asking for help was a weakness. What I tell clients today is my belief with great conviction is that asking for help is a sign of courage. And I want to be the male version of Brene Brown, where she speaks about the courage to be vulnerable and many other things. And I have many messages on personal accountability, owning our side of the street, crying. I think crying is cathartic. Most people that come into treatment, like even myself in active addiction, we didn't connect with our emotions. I certainly didn't connect with my emotions. I escaped my emotions going to cocaine, cannabis, gambling, and they did with their drug of choice. Well, the biggest superpower we have today is self-awareness and connecting with our emotions. And today I can connect with my emotions, good, bad, and indifferent. I do cry somatically sometimes. If I watch TV, I'll feel tears coming down. If I see a scene where a woman is being violated or a child is being, violated, that because of my childhood, that is my somatic response today, my trauma response. But that's now resolved, but it doesn't mean that I don't have moments that I get sad. I have plenty of moments. I have plenty of challenges today as a result of my past. And I view those challenges today as opportunities for me to learn. And those are messages that my higher power is giving me.
Man, you're so dialed in. You had mentioned superpower, and I speak about this a lot because the tenacity that an addict is capable of can be harnessed and used productively. And you're doing it. You were a top-notch gambling addict, and you were doing and manipulating the world to bend to your will. And so and not that, and I believe in a higher power and things that are outside of our control. However, the the ingenuity and tenacity and drive that an addict has is unmatched. And so I consider it to be a superpower that can be used for good. It could be used for evil, but it could also be used for good. And you're clearly using it for good by gaining the education and being a part of a movement and helping people relentlessly, right? You're relentlessly helping people. And so I see that as like the best use of a superpower that only an addict can really understand. But I also want to touch on something you mentioned, rewiring the subconscious. How does one do that? Or how did you do that?
Yeah, great question. I lead groups at the facility as well, and it's really important for them. And it goes back to what I said earlier, like, how do you rewire your subconscious mind? I can bore the clients and probably even bore myself. I could talk to them using difficult, complicated words such as neuroscience and neuroplasticity, but they're going to fall asleep in my group and they're not going to pay attention. So I believe in simplifying things today because certainly I know I overcomplicated things in the past. So it's about simplification. And it starts with understanding, like I said earlier, like birth to seven, our subconscious mind is formed. So to that fight, flight, survival mode, as I mentioned, and how do we change our default in our subconscious mind? By rewiring it. How do we rewire it, as you ask? We start with self awareness. It's really simple. Start with self awareness. So I often ask them, so where do you feel it in your body when you're anxious? Many of them will say, my shoulders, neck get tense, my stomach, abdominal cramps, whatever they feel. I said, wonderful. Now I'm going to help you develop a relationship between your body and your mind. Your body is now signaling to your mind that you're anxious. Rather than escape from it, because now you're self aware, let's change the inner dialogue. And how do we do that? We simply replace the negative thinking, the catastrophizing, the future tripping to positive reality based self talk. And it has to start in that format. It can't start with positive reality based self talk if one is not even connected to what they're going to talk about.
Right.
That's
Now,
why
positive reality based self talk, is that future oriented, or is that self talk about what may or is going to happen, or is it like related to the past?
it's related to the present. So when they're recognizing an emotion in that moment through their self-awareness, which starts with forming a habit, they're not gonna change this overnight. But if you could start to be self-aware of your emotions, whether somatically or otherwise, right? In real time, replace that. So for example, if someone comes in and says, "I'll never earn back the trust of my family." Now they're anxious, they're hopeless, have some depression symptoms. Okay, that's normal. Let's normalize that. But now that you're aware of that, replace that with saying, if I put in the work, I'm going to earn the trust back from my family. However, not on the timeline I want and not out of the words out of my mouth. which the family knows that the words out of our mouths are one of dishonesty and manipulation. So I'm going to do the next right thing through my behavioral changes. And when they see that, and hopefully they'll be willing to observe me in those behaviors, maybe, just maybe, I can earn back that trust. And so it's about the present. It's not about, we don't live in the future in recovery because then we're going to catastrophize. And we don't live in the past because then that past is not something that we want to bring into today. Today, we
Yeah.
want to bring the new, improved version of self.
Man, you really struck a chord in me, man, because, you know, when I started getting some sobriety under my belt in around a year, and I had called a very close friends of mine, and that's why it really hurt my heart that you never were able to mend that relationship with your mentor, and he had passed. That sucks, man. That's pretty tough. But I had an opportunity. Well, I was speaking to people that I had cared about, and again, my words were cheap. I was like, "Well, I've got a year of sobriety under my belt," and they just, why would they believe me? My words have become very cheap, and so I made the decision, and I went and lived with one of my very dear friends for like a month. And I did it through behavior. I'm like, I'm gonna sit right next to him in Las Vegas, sober as a nun in church. And I did it. And I say, and I just lived with him for a month. And he just, I mean, I was just hanging out. And he was, after like 3 weeks, he was like, wow. Yeah, like it's really happened. Then I did it again with a dear friend in Colorado. I just stayed at his house, and he was like, "Hey, do I need to hide the alcohol? Do I need to put this alcohol somewhere else?" I said, "No." And I was an honest assessment. I was at a place where it was okay. Now, earlier on, it would not have been an option. So I said, no, it's all right. And I stayed with him. It was through the behavior that I got to show it because I realized, to your point, my words had become you, or my words were no longer valuable. And I wasn't, I'd been dishonest so many times that the simple phrase of I'm sober now, it just didn't work. And so I had to show it.
I
It
think
was,
that's great. Sorry.
yeah. No, that's all right. Yeah, that it was. Yeah, it's so much of this work is, it runs parallel in so many of us, right? It's so wild, man. So tell everybody where they could learn more, how they could get involved, and what do you have going on recently that, like, what are you working on? Because I know you're doing work in the recovery space. So what does that look like these days?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It honestly is, first of all, not being complacent with my own recovery. Right? Because I am I'll be 10 years on May 9th of this year, and in less than a little over, in less than a month, actually. And I don't take that for granted. So I am just as susceptible to a relapse tomorrow morning as anybody with 3 days or 3 months. And so for me, it starts with, like you asked me earlier, like, how's my day? Like, how do you feel? And that's why you said, I'm in gratitude. I'm grateful today. I have a roof over my head, albeit it's a small roof. I've got food in my refrigerator. I have coffee that I was able to make this morning. The simple things in life, to me, I don't take for granted anymore.
Yeah,
A minimalist. I don't have the money to be a materialistic person today, but I have the money to work on myself and be the best version I can. This is a program of progress, not perfection, and I'm certainly far from perfect. But today I am 100% devoted. When I wake up, I don't feel like I have to go to Altus Rehab and view it as a job. I wake up 4:30 in the morning and I open my laptop. What's my day look like? And I get my ASS to work to a place that I'm passionate about and
yeah,
try my best when I open the door, if the clients are up and if they're not up when they get up, to ask them how they're doing today and how can I be of service. And um, I can't tell you how much that brings me joy today and so rewarding. And listen, I get texts from alumni. Thank you for changing my life. I tell them that it's not me that changed your life. It was your willingness to do the work that I encouraged you to do. So you deserve all the credit. I don't. And that's the humility that I practice on a daily basis. And I'm grateful that I had an opportunity to change the person I was becoming. And I hope tomorrow I could say that I'm making progress as well.
man. Simple. That's how you got to keep it most times, right? If you want to be successful, you got to keep it simple, and you're incredibly successful, right? Is successful in your gratitude and working with people and really making a difference for them, man. What a blessing. What a
Thank
blessing. Well, this concludes our time, Jonathan. Man, thank you so much for sharing all of your words and your journey with us, man. It's absolutely powerful to the max, brother. And so, yeah, this has been another episode of The Next Fix, guys. See you on the next one.